You know what I remember from school? I remember being in the studio for as many hours as humanly possible. I remember getting in trouble for being in the studio when I wasn't supposed to be in there. I was the guy that would we would get into the maintenance guys and get the keys, and I'd be in the studio at 4 a.m, and they'd be like, well, you're not booked in here. What are you doing in here? And I was like, well, no one's in here, so I want to be in the studio.
Yeah,
you know?
This is what I came to school for.
Yeah.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hello, Rockstars. This is Lid Shaw, your host of Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you inside the recording studio. I created this show to introduce you to real-world recording professionals to hear their stories and learn from their experiences so that you can take your records to the next level and be a rock star of the recording studio yourself. My guest today is F Reid Shippen, a multi-Grammy winning mixer, producer, engineer, and musician that just also happens to be a classmate of mine back in school. His mixing and producing credits include a wide range of artists like Death Cab for Cutie, Cage the Elephant, Arie, the Jonas Brothers, Arie, Church and Robert Randolph. He's also worked with Clay Aiken, Switchfoot, and the Backstreet Boys, to name a few. Reid mixes from right here at Robot Lemon, his personal SSL studio in Nashville, Tennessee. He's a super talented individual, has a deep musical understanding. Ever since I've known him, Reid has not been afraid to say what he thinks or stand for what he believes, whether in music or life, and I've always enjoyed hearing what this guy has to say. So please welcome F Reid Shippen to Recording Studio Rockstars. F, or Reid, sorry, man, I used to call you F. I'm learning to call you Reid. Reid, are you ready to rock?
I am ready to rock.
Dude, it's great to hang out with you here. And so I've done a little bit of an introduction, but in your own words, can you tell us more about who you are and what you do?
Well, thanks for having me on the program. It's really cool to do this, Liz. Who am I and what I do? Man, I'm just working stiff. I do a lot of mixing. I do some engineering, some production, a little bit of songwriting, stuff like that. I'm just sitting here trying to make music better.
Yeah,
as much as I can. Well,
it's fun, and you're very good at it, and I love the character of your studio, man. It's a beautiful place.
I appreciate it.
It's got a real vibe.
A messy vibe. I like to call this place it's like Audio Hoarders. If they had that TV show, this would be it.
Yeah, you have a collection of very cool looking stuff here for sure.
Wow.
So tell us a little bit about the name, Robot Lemon. It's an interesting name.
The name was actually me trying to figure out something that was unique and nearly impossible to forget or misspell. I don't know where I came up with Robot Lemon. I was working with this rock band, and the lead singer was this killer graphic designer, and he was drawing all these cool robots and stuff. And I was like, oh, well, why don't you make me a Robot Lemon? And he kind of drew it, and that's what the logo became. And I was like, all right, well, robots are cool, and lemons are great, and they make vodka taste good. So,
well, that's smart too, because that's rule number one in the internet, .com world, is make sure that you have a very easy to spell website if you're going to have one.
Yeah. Something hard to forget, and something almost impossible to misspell.
So now I know that you've worked in the past with Anthony Matula for some design work. Was that Anthony who was doing all the drawings for you?
It wasn't actually. He did some design work. He helped me on a website. He's fantastic, man. That guy's got an incredible eye.
Yeah, he actually helped me with mine too.
Yeah, he's killer. But no, those drawings again came from a friend of mine in Chicago who was in this band.
So I do remember when Anthony was, because I spoke to him when he was designing your new site, which was years ago at this point, but he was talking about how, he was getting it ready for you to do social media. I know social media has always been kind of an important thing for you. You've always just been very verbal and on Twitter and Facebook and all that.
Maybe overwhelmingly so.
Maybe overwhelmingly so. What do you have? Do you have any comments on how that sort of plays into making records these days? Is that even necessary?
I think so. I mean, I think that social media for me was and is kind of a grand social experiment. I'm really interested to look back in a decade at where we've been and how people relate to each other as far as social media goes. I've been trying to teach myself how to be the person that I want to be on social media. I've been learning. Basically, I'm on social media to learn for me. Yeah. I'm still trying to evolve my viewpoints on stuff, everything from music to politics to just the way people relate with each other. And I find that social media, Facebook in particular, is like a fascinating medium to do that, especially if you practice any sort of interest in not hewing to an exclusive viewpoint, but trying to embrace like multiple viewpoints, which I think is kind of key if you're going to do great music. I mean, that's part of the job of a great producer or a great mixer, is to not just say, okay, everything has to fit in the lane, in my lane, and you just say, well, what's going to work best for the song, what's going to work best for the music, and having multiple viewpoints and being open to different experiences, like that's kind of all part of the whole thing for me. So I found social media to be kind of a fascinating new aspect of our culture.
I know this is a sort of a tangent and sort of a weird tangent to start out an interview about studios on, but have you found, when you're making records and you're doing music, it's very much a matching of personalities. A lot of it, it's, people working with people that they like to work with. Have you found that social media and the internet has given you a chance to let people know who you are, and that sort of has an attraction quality to bringing in musicians that you really enjoy working with?
I think so. I mean, I'm sure it works both ways. I'm sure I've lost friends or lost opportunities or even gigs because of what I may or may not believe. If someone could say, what do you want to walk away from this whole experience as? I would prefer to walk away with people saying, as you said before, like, hey, Reid's really honest and he's open to discussion, and, give me a great rational argument and I'll change my mind. I'm not didactic about anything. Like, I'm in it for the experience and for learning and connection with people and stuff like that. So yeah. I don't know whether it's a benefit or not a benefit. I'm still in the middle of the experiment.
Right on. Well, this brings to mind a question I have, sort of a metaphysical view on making music or building your career. So I'm going to ask you this. I think when you're starting out, sometimes you look at opportunities that are out there for making music, mixing records, producing records, whatever you're going to do, and you think, well, there's stuff that's out there, and I should go do the work that's out there, and I should work with the people that are making records the way they're making it. And then there maybe is another aspect that says, or another viewpoint that says, I'm going to really, really do, maybe it's a little scarier too, but I'm going to stick to the music that really moves me and that's really true to my heart, because I think that I want to define my career based on who it is that I am and what I have to offer to music. How do you approach that? And do you have any strong feelings about the kinds of projects that you choose to work on and how they resonate with you, and how you balance that between what you'd really like to do and maybe what you feel like is, part of what you need to do?
I like to look at it from another perspective, which is, if somebody comes to you with music that they've created and that they've worked really hard on and that they believe in, I don't know that it's necessarily my job to judge them. Like, I know that they've put 100% of themselves in it, and this is their heart and their soul and their thing. And especially for people like us, like for engineers and for mixers, like, we're in a service business. This isn't about my ego, or the way I do things. This is about trying to make whatever this person poured their heart and soul into, like, as good as possible, like to connect with people on an emotional level, on a sonic level, on whatever level, like, it's just to kind of give the artist the best presentation of what they've worked so hard for. So I try not to be judgmental about that. I mean, I do say to like kids who ask me, if you only worked on the stuff that you absolutely loved, you would probably be unemployed most of the time.
Or you might not love it so much.
Yeah, you might not love it so much. And also you would give away a lot of opportunities to do things that could challenge you or could teach you something new. Like, I've been really fortunate to work on like a really wide array of different kinds of music, and I find that fascinating. It would be a bummer if you only did one thing over and over, although you'd probably get really good at it. At some point, it's going to become rote. And, I mean, when that happens, I don't feel like you give it your all.
No, you just get an account on Fiverr.com, right? And you start doing records that way.
Right, totally.
Sorry, I'm just kidding. Whoever's out there in the land of Fiverr, I
No, I mean, I think, stuff like that is fascinating,
So that also brings to mind the question. When I started making records, I remember having a strong feeling about what kind of music I liked or what kind of music I didn't like, more importantly. And then I discovered that as I worked making records and worked with more people, that changed. And all of a sudden, these appreciations opened up for styles of music that I never, ever thought I was going to like before. Talk about that a little bit. How's that experience been for you?
Well, that actually started for me way back in school at MTSU. One of my professors, John Hill, was this fantastic, John,
Yeah.
it's a fantastic teacher. And he was into classical music. So he dragged me into the Aspen Music Festival, which I did for a couple of years. And going up there, even though I had a little bit of experience with classical music, like growing up playing and singing in church and theater and stuff like that, that was like totally different, like a whole new way of listening to things, a whole new way of doing things. And it was super informative as far as ear training and being able to hear stuff. Like it was a huge boost to that ability, which I then could use for pop music. And it was fantastic.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember when we were in school, you talked about working with John and going out to Aspen and recording classical
Your memory
music.
is insane, by the way. I don't even remember what I did last week.
I just remember that. And what was the class that we took together? Was it music for film or
No,
something
seriously,
like that?
I'm not kidding. I really don't remember what I did last week. There's no way I could remember anything specific from MTSU. You know what I remember from school? I remember being in the studio for as many hours as humanly possible. I remember getting in trouble for being in the studio when I wasn't supposed to be in there. I was the guy that we would get into the maintenance guys and get the keys, and I'd be in the studio at like 4 a.m. and they'd be like, well, you're not booked in here. What are you doing in here? I was like, well, no one's in here, so I want to be in the studio.
Yeah, this is what I came to school for.
Yeah. So, and MTSU was great for that, honestly.
Let me mention something else that's different about now versus then. Do you remember when the beginning of the semester happened and there was a mad rush of all the students to go schedule their studio time? This was before we had the internet. This was before we had, well, I guess we had some sort of internet back then, but it was before we all had our own computers, and you had to go down to the computer lab and sign in to get on like an ancient little
terminal.
Terminal, and then use some lines of code to try and figure out and interpret what the whole month, the whole semester schedule was.
And I actually hacked that I just waited, and then I took all of the midnight to 4 and 4 to 8.
Yeah.
I would try and get like the 8 to midnight sessions so I could just be in there for long stretches, because 4 hours in the studio, like what are you going to get done in 4 hours? So,
well, now you get something done.
Yeah. Right.
Because you learn to be efficient, right? We'll come back and talk more about that. Well, so let's start out. Do you by any chance have an inspirational quote for us you'd like to share?
My favorite inspirational quote is, and I'll probably horribly mispronounce this, is esse quam videri, which is to be rather than to seem, Yeah. Like that's my favorite inspirational quote. I would rather be something than pretend to be something, which is a challenge, especially with social media.
Oh, yeah, really. So is that sort of somewhere along the lines of the fake it till you make it concept, except that it sounds like faking it, so maybe not quite.
I don't know. I think maybe it's more like I've found that the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Opportunity just arrives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, opportunity is all over the place. The trick is giving yourself enough time in the trenches and enough training to identify and take advantage of the opportunity when it arises.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that qualifies as an inspirational quote, but
I think so. I think being and doing, I mean, especially for anybody who's listening, who's sort of embarking on their career or their music making journey, there's this idea of just, how am I going to get from here to there, and just do it, just start doing it.
Yeah, there's no substitute for hard work in any field.
There really is no there, is there? There's just now anyway.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about you. I knew you in school. We were both going to college and we were learning tons of stuff. I learned a lot in school, but I learned a lot of different stuff as soon as I got out of school and started actually making records. What'd you do starting out, getting out of school? Where'd you go?
Well, I started out by doing a lot of internships. In fact, my last year of school, I was living in Nashville and commuting to MTSU, for classes and stuff, and interning at as many studios as I could and with as many people as I could. And,
oh, that's cool. Interning at more than one studio.
Yeah, I was just trying to get as much experience as I could wherever. And I got to work with a bunch of people, and I got to help build a couple studios, which was really informative. You learn a lot when you're putting a studio together from scratch. And it led to assisting opportunities, which is something that doesn't exist now as much, but back then was fairly prevalent, and it gave me an opportunity to like earn my way onto an assisting gig. And honestly, I got to a point where I was like, every day I had to go to classes. I was like, I'm missing work. I could be working on a record, and instead I'm going to classes to work on records. Wait a second, like, I don't know. So, but I finished the degree, sent it home to mom.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to my degree. I got two of them. I've never needed either one.
Yeah, what's your other one?
Architecture.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Bachelor's of Art in Architecture.
I almost went to school for architecture.
Well, in architecture, they say that architecture is like frozen music. And when I went to MTSU to go learn how to record music, I was like, yeah, enough with the frozen music. Let's go learn how to do some liquid architecture.
Some liquid architecture. That's really cool.
All right. Well, so you went out, you interned, you started working, everything. Tell us about, and today here you figured out a lot about making records. Share with us something that was kind of an important failure for you along the way.
Well, an important failure. I don't know. There's been so many. The first time you get fired, or the 10th time or the 100th time you get fired, is a good learning experience. In my opinion, if you're not getting fired, you're not trying hard enough. Playing things safe is, I don't know, it's just not the way I like to do things. So very early on, especially in mixing, I would do some fairly crazy stuff. I just do what I hear. The beauty about it is if somebody doesn't like it, they can always take it out. But you always run the risk of offending somebody. Although the way I approach it is like I'm not trying to piss you off. I'm not trying to tell you that you don't know what you're doing. I'm not trying to say that my opinion's any better. I just heard this thing and it was like, oh, well, maybe that could make this cooler, or maybe this would add something, or maybe this would spark some inspiration in someone. And so I just do it. And, most people would be like, oh, that's really cool. Or I don't like that. And I was like, okay, cool. And, you're going to mute it.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, someone would just be like, how dare you do this to my music? And I'm like, oh, well, dude, sorry, man. Like, boom, mute button, done. Yeah. Like, no big deal. So learning how to take risks like that taught me that, there are avenues worth exploring. And it also taught me that people will respect you when you're really digging in, because they're sitting there going, oh, well, this guy isn't just trying to balance it, get it done as fast as possible, move on to the next one. Okay, thanks, give me my money or whatever. He's like, oh, well, he thought about the intro, or he thought about the song was maybe a little too long, or maybe we could lose this section, or maybe we could add something really cool. It's like, wow, this person really cares about what we're doing. Like, that's something that I learned from taking risks and pissing some people off, but then, finding the benefit of it. Yeah.
Do you find that the days that you are feeling inspired like that and you're just jumping right in seem shorter anyway?
Oh, yeah. When you're doing something that you love and you're having fun, like, time goes by like that. So,
again, you talk about another idea of mixing being just simply balancing things. I've noticed that sometimes you can approach mixing where you're just trying to sit everything together. It's almost like if everything gets equal voice in a song, you can spend hours and hours working on something and trying to balance everything just right. And then you get to the end, you realize that it's just like a big wash of gray, right? It's really boring.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about your process. I like to imagine you as more of a painter, when you're mixing and putting yourself into it and taking risks. What's your process like? How do you approach it? How do you put yourself in a place where you're just mixing from the heart and not from the head?
Well, usually the first thing I do whenever I get a song is I listen to the rough mix. There are some people who are like, I never listen to rough mixes, but that's crap, because, the people that sent you that thing have been working on it for weeks or months or even years. There's intent there. For me not to pay attention to their intent is, I think, silly, because it's their record. It's not my record. Also, rough mixes are very informative for, like, wait a second, I don't hear that guitar. Are we missing a file? Are we missing a guitar? Did they take it out? Was that intentional? Like, I want to make sure that I've got everything, because there's nothing more frustrating than doing a mix and sending it off and then somebody calling you and going, hey, dude, those are the wrong guitars.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh, you've got to be kidding me.
Or it's missing some key element.
Right.
You're like, No wonder the chorus didn't hit me right.
Yeah, or I've had this too, I've gotten stuff where they don't send a rough or they send an instrumental rough and then they're like, well, the vocal's in the wrong place. Like that pocket's not right. And I'm like, okay, I can't, we don't move stuff. Although sometimes you never know, something can get moved. I mean, it's possible, but we go to great lengths not to change anything on purpose, but without a reference, you might be like, all right, well, I didn't know that. Or, you hear the vocal and you're like, or something, and you're like, man, that pocket feels weird. But then you check it and you're like, no, that's how they had it. So maybe it was intentional, I don't know. I also like listening to the rough mix because the first listen through to the song, I can listen to it as a whole and kind of just get what they're trying to say, get where they're trying to come from emotionally. Maybe ideas will pop up or, I'll try this or I'll try that and that's usually where I'll start is like points of interest, like in the track, like trying to identify like hooks or points of interest or, sparks like that give you things to like capitalize on or things to focus on.
Yeah. And then if you've got ideas, those are sort of where you're pushing the boundaries and you're trying stuff. You're just inspired with things that you might hear listening to the rough mix that you're going to try when you go to mix it.
Yeah, sure. Sometimes you'll hear like a really cool hook, back in the chorus and you're like, oh man, you should start the song like that. Like that's a really cool hook. So I'll throw it in the front of the song. If they don't like it, we can always take it out.
Yeah, that's a good trick. That's a good trick. I like that. You grab something from the middle and just throw it to the front when you're feeling it.
Yeah.
And you never really know until you do it. You got to just throw it up there and then listen to it, right?
Yeah, and then you never really know until you play it for someone, and hopefully you've got somebody who's going to be listening with an open mind. Like I just did that last week on a song, and the producer was like, hey, that vocal intro surprised me, but now, I think it's actually really cool. And it's like, cool, it was worth a try.
Talk about that. Speaking of being surprised by things, there's a concept called demoitis. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
I think I actually still own the website demoitis.com. At one point, I had a web page up that whenever anybody typed in demoitis.com, it would just come up with a big text thing that said, get over it already. Demoitis is just being human. If you've listened to something for days, weeks, months, you're used to it, it becomes right. Same thing in this town, especially with country music. There's a lot of really fantastic songwriters and they write these fantastic songs and they do these demos, good, bad, or indifferent. Some of the demos are fantastic. Some of them are terrible. But what happens is the artists and the label people and everybody falls in love with this song, and them falling in love with this song is like falling in love with a girl, who has like, black hair, and then she dyes her hair. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, that's not what I fell in love with. Now, hey, she's still awesome. She may even look better, but you were used to it the other way, and people get attached to that. So, a lot of times you find yourself chasing the demo, not because it's better in any way, but just because people have become accustomed to it. And in their mind, that was what was right. Unfortunately now, especially with the technology we have, there's the ability to have something in a demo. Like there's one thing that's completely awesome and the rest of it sucks. And they get fixated on the one thing that's completely awesome, where they're like, man, I just love the kick drum on the demo. I was like, yeah, man, I love the kick drum on the demo too. It's twice as loud as the vocal, which is probably why you love it. I can't make the rest of the track right and have the kick drum twice as loud as the vocal. So it's never going to sound that way. Yeah. But see, they still they love the kick drum. They love the excitement of that. A lot of people will distort demos with insane amounts of limiting and even just distortion because quote unquote, it sounds exciting, but you can't turn that in to iTunes that way. People will freak out. It sounds like crap on the radio, but try explaining to someone why it's not as exciting because it's not distorted. It's a challenge.
What are examples for you of instances where you mix something and you push it to a place and then you personally go back and listen to some place that used to be a little bit that you like, something that's got, fullness to a certain instrument or something like that? What are some typical examples where you push it in the mix and then you hear the old version and you actually choose to back it off or take it a little bit back towards where it used to be? Is there anything that sort of repeatedly comes up?
I don't think there's anything that sort of repeatedly comes up. Sometimes I'll get lost in what I'm doing and have to remind myself, well, this is where we're coming from. Or, I actually just did a song for an artist that was it's a country artist, but it was very much a pop song. And my first version of the mix, I kind of let it, I ran away with the pop thing a little bit and, like put some stuff in and like shortened the intro and like did some stuff that was choppier and everything. And the artist didn't like that. He was like, I like the way we had it before, which was a little more traditional and a little more, and you know what? It's like, dude knows what he's doing and it's his record and that's totally fine, but I heard it this way. So I figured I'd give it a shot. And fortunately I've worked with these guys before and they know like, yeah, thanks for that, but no, we'd rather have it this way. And I'm like, okay, cool. And we'll put it back and it's totally fine.
All right. So let me ask you this question for people who are listening, who are going into mixing or doing mixing now, the process of doing the back and forth with somebody that you're mixing for, a client, a songwriter, musician, a band, how do you advise people as far as doing that back and forth, being able to do revisions and making sure that you're able to, pay your bills and survive? Do you have any suggestions for people about approaches, whether you sort of stick to hourly revisions when you're going to bill somebody for that, or whether flat rates work better? Just advice for somebody who's trying to figure this out at the beginning.
Well, I mean, I think everybody's different. There's two ways to do it. I generally charge by the song. And then once we go over a certain amount of revisions, I'll start billing. But that line is pretty gray and pretty flexible. I mean, if I feel like we're making revisions because of stuff that I would have wanted to change anyway, I'm not going to bill those. I very rarely bill. I mean, it's rare to go more than like 3 or 4 revisions on a song for me, but sometimes you go 15 because you've got 10 people speaking into it. And sometimes on some of these songs you get into the, hey, let's try this. What if there was an acoustic in the second verse? No, let's take that out. What if there was like a tambourine here? What if there was a drum beat here? And you can, rise pretty high as far as time goes. So, I mean, I find it reasonable to be the guy who's like, yeah, man, I want your stuff to be great. I'm going to put a ton of time in it. If the revisions keep coming and keep coming and keep coming, I got to bill for it because it takes time.
Yeah.
I just try and be fair. Now, Richard Dodd he's an hourly guy and he's like, this is my hourly charge. You want to do revisions till you're blue in the face? That's fine. You want me to come over and like sweep your studio? I'll sweep your studio. This is how much I charge an hour. That's kind of his thing. And I can see.
Wait, I can have Richard Dodd come over and sweep my studio?
I think maybe you could call him.
That's pretty cool.
I think maybe, I don't know if he'd do that.
Will he babysit too and teach my daughter how to make records?
That'd be great. Wouldn't that be amazing? Yeah, he's incredible. No, I mean, I remember a friend of mine who was on a day rate and he was like, if you hire me for the day, this is my rate. I'll work 12 hours for you. I don't care what you want me to do. Like you want me to cut your grass.
Yeah, it sounds like you just find something that works for yourself and that's what you end up doing.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is you can abuse both sides of that equation. So I just me personally, I try and be upfront with people. I try and be completely fair. And generally I don't run into problems because people know, like if we did a ton of revisions on this song because we were trying radio edits and we were trying this, that, and the other thing, and they get the bill and there's a couple extra revisions billed, they know we did more than that. They see that I'm not going to hold them to that. Like it's, it works out. I just have to do what feels right for me. And hopefully that's right for everybody. So,
yeah, well, you used a key phrase, upfront. I always find that communication up front on the way when you start something is always more valuable than the communication at the end.
Yeah, I think that's key. And I think that's something that a lot of people shy away from. And this would be a good learning experience is do the business like on the front end and get it in writing. Like I like to tell people, especially people that I go into business with, like we're going to do a contract so that we can stay friends. Mm-hmm. Like, we're going to lay out what this business is about and how we're going to do it. And that way, if there's a conflict later, if the conflict's about business, we can just look at what we agreed to do.
Yeah.
If there's a creative conflict, that's going to happen and that's fine. But, it's not going to, things aren't going to change or people aren't going to make assumptions. Like try and just be really upfront about everything.
Yeah. I've found that in the age of the internet, that helps on a certain level because we just have email. A lot of our dialogue between people is written dialogue. So there's always at least a little bit of a text trail that you can go back and look at to see what you guys said.
Oh yeah. I love that. I hate phone conversations. I'll space what we talked about on the phone, but it's great to have it in email. Yeah.
Well, on the phone thing, everybody spaces that. And then later on you said, but I said this, but I said that.
Right.
Nobody can demonstrate it. So what about contracts though? Is contract writing and interacting with lawyers still sort of a regular part of making records these days in your world, or has that changed much?
It's tough. It is for production, not necessarily for mixing, because you can just do that in an email or whatever.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There are situations now in production where the old school way of doing things is so expensive that you're not gonna make. You're spending as much money on attorneys as you are going to make on the project, which makes zero sense. And that's a difficult transition right now, where the music business is. Because back in the day when someone was making like, $50,000 a song to produce it, it's like, sure, spend $5,000 on the lawyer, who cares? But, you can't spend $5,000 on an attorney for a record where you're making $5,000, because that doesn't make any sense.
Have you seen the likes of LegalZoom.com and those sort of things entering into the music industry at all to make that stuff sort of like, click $100 and get your contract done? I haven't, but
no, I mean, I hadn't looked into that. I mean, there's some pretty boilerplate stuff that you can have a fairly reasonable deal memo that you can just kind of fill in and send via DocuSign and do stuff like that. The problem is just because of the way the music business works, everyone is just kind of trained to say, go talk to an attorney.
Yeah, exactly.
And talking to an attorney is going to cost you $200 an hour or whatever. So,
yep, that's true. Well, so, okay. Well, it's good to know that hasn't changed much.
Yeah.
Stick to email as much as you can until you have to do something else. All right. Well, so, F, how about sharing a moment of success with us? Something that really was just like an I've made it point for you in your career of making records.
Man, I don't know that I feel like I've made it. The moments of success that I really cherish are just working on that stuff that just everything feels great. I had an artist and a producer over here like 2 days ago, and we were listening to the song, and you just hear it on playback, and you're like, this song's going to do great. Like, yes, this is exactly right. This is exactly what it needs to be. I remember back in the day, years ago, working on a Johnny Lang record. It was good, hard work, but it felt easy. Like, I would come in and I would work for a couple hours, and it would be like, man, this feels great. And then the producers would come in and they're like, man, this feels great. And we'd be like, I guess we're done with this song. Let's go on to the next song, and that was like the whole record. It was almost like being on vacation because it was so much fun, and it turned out great. And, it actually won a Grammy, and, it was like, wow, that's really cool. So,
nice.
But I'm looking for that daily if I can find it, and obviously some days are better than others, but, you get to work with great bands or great artists sometimes where you're just like, man, this is just, this is fantastic.
Well, it's funny because, you've won multiple Grammys, and a Grammy is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
But the experience of receiving one is not like a single moment. It's sort of an accreditation that you have that you've acquired. You did the work a while ago, you receive it, it comes later. And there is that thing about just working with people in the studio when you're just having a good moment and you're going to lunch together and you're making a great record that truly just feels really good.
Yeah, or when you're sitting there and sound's coming out of the speakers and these people are in there playing, and it's just like, you're like, man, like I think it was Ed Cherney had said that the fact that music can come up a wire is a miracle.
Yeah.
It's amazing to like be present for when that magic is happening. Like that's just the best thing ever.
It's emotional.
Yeah.
How about something that was sort of a light bulb moment for you? I hate to use the term an aha moment because everybody uses that, but that sort of idea, something where the process of making records just clicked with you at some point where you had a realization about something.
I'll call you when the process of making records clicks.
Right on.
I can think of two. Well, one aha moment was getting into the studio, and this has happened on multiple occasions with, a really great singer, and realizing, oh, that's where those great vocals come from.
Yeah.
You always have people saying, hey, I want this to sound like this or that to sound like that, but there is a reason why Aretha sounds like Aretha and Adele sounds like Adele and Seal sounds like Seal, and there are, you get great people. And especially if you get a really nice vocal chain too. And then you get someone who's just great, and everything just falls into place and you go, oh, wow. Like That's amazing. And one example is that was I was working with Michael McDonald, and we set up like 10 or 12 nice microphones. It's like, it's Michael McDonald. We want to make sure we get the best possible vocal sound. Let's try all those mics. Man, the one that worked was a 57.
Wow.
Yeah. It was perfect.
That's
it was
awesome.
He's so loud that, a lot of the vintage tube mics, they kind of collapse. But as soon as he got on a 57, you were like, that's Mike Mack. Boom, done.
That's cool.
That was really cool. And then you start to realize that it's not the best tool, it's the right tool.
Yeah.
Microphones, drums, whatever. Like it's not necessarily always the best, but it's the right one.
I've experienced that before, putting up multiple mics and arriving at something unexpected like that. Now, I would guess this one is that you might not have arrived at the 57 as an option had you not put up some other mics and heard them in comparison.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's having the courage to say, all right, well, let's try something weird, or let's try something different. That's how you find stuff. I mean, I constantly, when I'm tracking, I deliberately try and paint myself into corners or do stuff that's kind of weird or strange, just hoping that you'll stumble across something that's really cool.
Yeah.
It's nice to have discoveries like that. Like I just did some drum tracking, and halfway through I was like, I wonder what happens if I do a MS setup in front of the drum kit. And I came back to the studio and, decoded it. And I was like, oh man, this is a really cool room sound. Like I'm going to do this, next time I track drums. Like, and it was just a, well, what if moment. So. Well,
when I was in architecture school, we studied the Bauhaus School of Design. And one of the things that we studied was they would make posters, and it was just, you had this square piece of paper or rectangular piece of paper, and you have to design a poster inside it. And all the greatest designs always used the edges, and they'd push up against the edges, or your text is going off and that kind of thing. And I know this sounds like a tangent, but what that meant to me was that really effective art was about taking the boundaries that you're given and pushing them.
Yeah.
Finding a way to push those boundaries and make your art express itself outside of those limitations. And I've always enjoyed that in making records too, whether it's a few tracks or you just say you're going to take 2 microphones and do an MS pattern on a drum kit, find a way to make boundaries and then push those boundaries.
Yeah, and I think that's the job of an engineer. We were at Blackbird a couple of weeks ago, and the drummer was like, hey, I need a little more reed in the headphones. And what he meant was, I always cut stuff through, I'll cut drums through like a Moog synthesizer or through a guitar pedal or something, like just a little bit of vibe.
Yeah.
And he, for that particular song, he wanted to hear more of that trashy sound because it made him play differently than it would just hearing like the regular drum sound. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that was kind of eye-opening, because it's like, you want to inspire people to come up with really cool parts. And sometimes that means like, well, for this guitar, why don't you come in the control room and why don't we plug you directly into an Altec and plug that into another mic pre, and then we'll distort the crap out of it and see what happens. And and they're obviously going to play different than if you just go, okay, just give me another setting on whatever you got or whatever. Like, trying to find the best thing for the song gets everybody involved.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings up an interesting idea too, because sometimes people approach tracking records in terms of, let's be really conservative. Let's just get pure full frequency sounds on everything.
Which can work on certain projects really well.
Yeah. But you make the great point, which is you play differently if you hear something coming back different.
Yeah, and you hopefully get a more unique musical thing out of that, which is, I think, really important.
Yeah. Well, right on. Well, let's take a break for a second. When we come back in, we'll jump into the jam session.
Okay.
Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks, And you get downloadable multi-tracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multi-track files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record, Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, rock stars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. Hey, we're back here with F Reid Shippen, and we're going to jump into the jam session here, a series of quick questions, and just see what you think. You ready for the jam session?
No.
Awesome. All right, cool. Reid, at the beginning of making records, what was holding you back from getting started?
Confidence.
Confidence?
Am I supposed to answer more than that?
Yeah, no, you don't have to, but just not feeling sure of yourself as you get started?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is intimidating. You're holding somebody's life work in your hands, and there's a lot of different variables, and it's thousands of subjective decisions that are based on thousands of subjective decisions. So, it's in the beginning, it's hard to find your confidence, that you know what you're doing.
How'd you get past that? How'd you find it? Or are you still looking?
I'm still looking. No, just from doing and doing and doing and doing and doing.
Yeah, just be, right?
Yeah, just
like
hard work.
Quote.
Yeah, doing it.
Okay, cool. So what was some of the best advice that you received?
Wow. Man, I don't know that I have an answer for that. Yeah, sorry. I don't know that I have an answer for that.
Anything recently? Anything that somebody said that struck a chord in the studio? No pun intended.
Well, I guess some of the best advice I've had is people saying, we're some of the best advice I've given myself. One thing that I think it's important that everybody realize is when somebody comes to you and says, I want you to work on the record, at some point, everybody has crisis of confidence. I think every creative person that I've ever met thinks that at some point someone's going to be like, hey, you know what? I just figured out that this guy doesn't know what the heck they're doing. They've been faking it this whole time. And then you're going to be found out. Now everyone's going to know that you don't know what you're doing. Every single creative person I know has found that out. So I don't think that's true. And I think that you have to remind yourself, especially because our jobs involve a lot of criticism. They came to me in the first place because they liked what I did. And it's not something that I have to sit there and expect all kinds of positive motivation from those people. The positive motivation was, hey, we really believe in you. That's why we're here. Because it's really easy to do a lot of work and send it out. And then all you get back is, well, this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. And you start to get down on yourself, but you have to remind yourself, the right thing is that they wanted you to be on this project in the first place. Yeah. They are already walking in going, this guy knows what he's doing. We really like what he's doing. We really want him to be a part of this creative process. So you have to remind yourself that, you don't sit there and you don't need to be coddled or, you don't need to be constantly reaffirmed. And that's a tough process. I think we all struggle with that. So I don't know if that counts as advice, but it's a good realization.
Well, it does. And I think that the fact that they're having a dialogue with you at all is an indication that they approve of what you do.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'd just not call you back. That'd be the end of it, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So now how about a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce that you can share? Something that people could use right now making their records.
A tip, hack, or secret sauce?
Whether it's on the recording side, production side, or the mixing side.
Well, on the recording side, just try new things, especially stuff that's unexpected. Like one of my favorite hacks on recording acoustic guitar has been using an RCA ribbon, like a 77, and running it through an old Altec mixer and just diming the treble. So it sounds really cool on a lot of stuff. It's also really noisy because Altecs are noisy and ribbons are low gain. But it doesn't really necessarily matter. I mean, you wouldn't use it for a pristine recording, but it gives a lot of character. And actually, if you're careful and you record like the noise by itself, you can use some digital techniques to remove most of that and still retain the character of the guitar, like with isotope. So sometimes it's worth it just to get a really cool character instead of like, oh, here's a boring, clean acoustic guitar.
Yeah. So when you say dime it, you're talking about just cranking it, the treble.
Yeah.
But just for listeners, so so an RCA, did you say 44?
77.
77 is probably kind of a dark top anyway. So it's not like cranking the treble on a condenser mic that's bright to begin with.
No, yeah, you need to crank the treble on a ribbon mic, know, especially for an acoustic guitar.
Just to follow up on that, when is the right time to know that it's okay to be experimenting on this stuff? Do you just try and always sneak something in there? Do you stop a session and say, hey, we're going to do some experimenting now for a little while? Or is it,
I never stop a session. What I do is I always set it up beforehand. So, if we're going to record acoustic, you go in, there'll be 2 or 3 microphones. One of them will be a really pristine, like I know this is going to grab the guitar and it's going to be fine. One of them will be a ribbon. One of them will be like a 57 or a, something crazy, or, we'll put a lav mic inside the guitar, or we'll mic an amp with a contact pickup or something. And it's just like, a lot of times I find the best sound that I get is blending all of those together. But if someone just said, hey, you know what, we just have to have a pristine guitar on this, it's like, cool, shut the other 2 off and, here's a KM56, like boom, pristine guitar. It sounds great.
Yeah. Steve Albini, when I was working with him, once told me that he liked to add one new thing to every session. That gave him a chance to try something new, but it wasn't so much that it would, change the reliability of the session itself.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Like always try something new. You can get lost in that and you can try 10 things new and you can, screw yourself. So, I think adding one thing new is probably a really good idea.
Incremental changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So how about sharing a favorite hardware tool in the studio, something physical that that really makes sessions better?
The boring answer to that, which is the important answer, is really good monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
Like people concentrate, I think, so much on getting such and such mic pre or such and such microphone or like all this crazy stuff, and they don't bother making sure that they're in a really good listening environment, and so they don't know really what they're recording, and they don't know if they're getting a good result or not. So that's the boring answer for me. The more fun answer is I love going into the studio with guitar pedals like Earthquaker guitar pedals, or my Mini Moog filter or something like that, like something that just gives something a little character, something a little unexpected.
I would qualify your first boring answer by saying this. When you're making a record, the amount of changes and decisions you have in front of you just by adjusting the levels of the faders and the EQs on all those tracks is already a huge number of decisions. Mm-hmm. And so monitoring allows you to tell what it is that you're doing when you're making those changes.
Yeah, I cringe. I see a lot of people who have home studio setups and they're real concerned about their plugins and all this gear and all this cool stuff, and then they take 2 crappy speakers and they're sitting on a shelf that's way too low for their ears, or they're horizontal instead of vertical, so they're getting all kinds of weird phase stuff, and there's no treatment, and it's just like a drywall room, and you're just like, man, you're not hearing anything about what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, it's, I guess, file under boring but important.
Right? All right, cool. Well, so now let's jump into that. So plugins. What about a software tool in the studio you really like having?
Man, I love the UAD digital stuff. Like their stuff is really killer because it has character to it. I also love Isotope. They make some pretty insanely cool tools, not just tools for working on the audio, but like the repair tools.
Like RX4, or is it up to 5 now?
I don't know. I mean, they come up with a lot of updates. Like, it's like an update every other week. But yeah, some of the stuff that you can do with that is just insanely cool and can save you, man. You can take clicks out of, like actual click, headphone bleed click.
I took it right out of a lead vocal.
Oh,
once.
man.
I couldn't believe it.
It's incredible. So yeah, those tools are really
It takes a minute. So if you're listening to this and you do find yourself messing around with RX, make sure you set aside some time.
Yeah.
You got to put on a new brain there for a second while you figure out how to use it.
Actually, that was really good advice that I read on Facebook the other day, was from a guy named Huskolds. Do you know him? he's been around. He's done a lot of really great work, super talented. But he, one of the things he said, and this was in regards to software, but I think it's true for everywhere, is he's like, really get to know your tools. Know your tools inside and out. Because if you have 100 tools that you don't know, you're not nearly as well off as if you have 5 tools that you know backwards and forwards.
Plug in. Before you buy your next plugin, take a look at the ones you got.
Yeah, I mean, there's how's
that song go? Love the one you're with?
Yeah, right. Totally. Do you really need 20 digital EQs? No, you don't. But you really do need to know how to use the ones that you have really, really well. And honestly, some of the stuff I have, I know really, really well. Some of it just scares me because it's so complicated.
I know that feeling. Every once in a while, I'll go through the plugin folder and I'll just remove plugins. Just put them in a holding folder. Come back to them later.
Yeah.
All right. So how about sharing a great resource for the business side of making records, having a studio?
The business side.
Yes, taking care of business.
Man, the best resource I've found for that is common freaking sense. Like, just think things through. Don't put stuff off and be like, oh, I'll just deal with this later. Or, we talked about that earlier where you try and get things done up front. And all creative people are like, I'd rather be more about the music than about the money. But you're going to run into trouble if you get 3/4 of the way through a record and then people are like, well, hey, that money that we said we were going to pay you, we kind of spent it or whatever. So, I've seen a lot of friends suffer, and I've suffered too, from thinking that it's going to be a downer if you just say, okay, well, if I'm going to do your record, here's the deal. I charge half up front. The half up front sets the time aside, like we put it in the schedule. And then before I turn over masters, like you pay the rest of it. Mm-hmm. Obviously it works different with record labels than it does with indie artists. Sometimes for people I don't know, I say I'm going to charge the whole thing up front.
You mean record labels don't like to pay?
Well, no, actually, I haven't had a ton of issues with record labels paying. It's just, if I'm doing a project for a label that I've worked with, I don't have to worry if they're going to disappear. But if you're working with an indie act that you've never worked with before and you're trusting them to pay you at the end, I mean, bands are notoriously bad with money. Sometimes you get to the end of the project and they're like, dude, man, I'm sorry, but we don't have the money, Yeah. It's just like, yeah, you need to protect yourself from that. I mean, it's only reasonable, so just common sense, like be smart about that. Like you're worth what you're charging. Hopefully, your time is worth what you charge. So.
Yeah. And you're investing in the next record by treating this one professionally.
Sure.
At the same time.
Sure. I mean, what was the quote? If you're good at something, never do it for free.
Right.
Was that the Joker from The Dark Knight?
That was so good. Oh man, what a tragedy too. So that does make me want to ask you about the what you've learned about making mistakes in business and how that relates to it being about relationships with people. Like you're working with people. There's some people you work with a lot. There's some people you've never worked with before. Have you found that, leaving a little bit of gray area, taking some risks, and then just like it's more valuable to just find the people that are good to work with and know you can trust them?
Yeah. I mean, it's always nice to work with people who are good to work with. What you start to learn is, as much as you want to look on the bright side of human nature, the phrase "no good deed goes unpunished" tends to pop up a lot. If I call it stupid tax, I think we've all paid it. There have been situations where someone's really good at talking a good game, or someone's really dancing around an issue. Basically, I've found out that if people are doing this professionally, but they don't want to talk about money, or they want to hem and haw, or there's this, that, and the other thing, that generally means that they're not serious about it. And if they're not serious about it, you can't expect them to be serious about you.
They're already trying to tell you the answer to your question at that point, maybe.
Yeah. And you pay the stupid tax by falling prey, I guess, in so many words, or, to that once or twice. And then you just start to go, so that we're all on the same page. And so we're all going to stay friends. This is the way I do business. If that's a problem, which if you're not being a jerk about it, it should never be a problem. No one expects you to work for free, I would hope. If it's a problem up front, it's going to be a problem at the end. So you might just be better off by saying, well, maybe this isn't the project for me.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So here's kind of a hypothetical question here. If you were starting out and you were dropped in a strange new city You didn't have your studio and your stuff. And you were going to start out with a simple setup, find people to record, and then make ends meet while you built up your recording career there. Obviously, this question is kind of directed at people who are in that situation now,
If I was
too.
starting out or starting over?
Starting out or starting over. Well, I guess whichever one you want to answer. Whether it was you starting over or whether it's just advice for somebody who is starting out now. What would be a good setup to start with for recording?
As far as like...
Let's say somebody who's recording their own music.
Well, again, you know, the first thing I would do is find a good room that you can acoustically treat.
Okay.
You know, and make sure you have good speakers and a good pair of headphones. You know, a laptop. I'm really impressed with the UA Apollo stuff.
Mm-hmm. That comes up a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to beat. You can pretty much have a pretty kick-ass studio by taking a powerful Mac laptop and hooking it into a Thunderbolt Apollo, and you know, like hooking a nice mic up to that. I mean, obviously there's ways that you can go better from that, but if you're talented, you know, a couple of nice mics and an Apollo, you can do a heck of a lot of damage. You know, it's a really good system. Like they did a really good job on that.
Now, what about monitors? You talked about treating the room. Can you get away with inexpensive monitors, or you've got some pretty exceptional monitors in your studio.
Yeah, I earn my way up to that. I think you can get away with inexpensive monitors. I think there's a break-even point. You know, there's a lot of cheap monitors that cheat you on some reproduction. Where I mean, it almost got to a point where I could tell people is like, oh, I know what speakers you have because I can tell what's missing from some of the stuff that you record. But again, you know, what everybody needs to remember is, as far as monitoring and room acoustics, like you have two issues, low end and high end, basically. And low end is a function of the size of the room and the materials, and high end you can treat. So, you know, just try not to put your studio in a square drywall box.
Oh, so let me bring up, it mentioned something that is really beautiful about your room. You've got a lot of bookshelves and a lot of books.
Yeah. The
books don't look like they're here for reading so much.
No, they're here for diffusion and absorption and bass trapping and stuff like that. And in all fairness, that was Richard Dodd's idea.
Yeah.
He did this at Rick Rubin's place in Malibu, I guess, and he said it worked really well, and I loved the way it looked, so I copped it.
Where'd you get all the books?
It was a law library that a friend of a friend had abandoned in an old building, so we took a pickup truck over there and filled it like 3 or 4 trips and brought all these dusty old law books back.
And I noticed that they're not, a few of them are spine facing out, but most of them are paper facing out.
Yeah, I figured that would be more diffuse and more, you know, a softer surface than a reflective surface. So yeah. Plus it looks cool.
All right, cool. So last question. What's the single most important thing somebody can do to become a rock star of the recording studio themselves?
Hard work and dedication.
Man, anything easier than that?
No. That's what it takes.
Awesome. Well, dude, thanks so much for doing this. It's been just a real pleasure to hang out with you. I haven't really seen much of you since school, so
I know, right?
Hopefully this is the beginning of a new chapter here.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been really fun, and I really appreciate what you're doing, and it's great to catch up. So thanks.
It's very cool to see what you've done with your music and your career and your studio.
Well, thank you. It's very kind.
And family.
It's
nice to meet your wife.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks so much for being on Recording Studio Rockstars, Mr. F Reid Shippen.
Thanks for having me, Ridge. I appreciate it.
We'll see you around Nashville. See you around the studio.
All right, cool.
Cheers.
Later.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.